So the Women's Prize longlist for 2024 has been announced, and it is precisely what we were all expecting, full of big name authors, and oh no, wait, that is the exact opposite of what happened. So let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel, and today we're talking about the frankly very surprising longlist announced by the Women's Prize judges. Just like last year's Booker and to a lesser extent last year's Women's Prize, we got a longlist full of books that have until now passed many readers by, or at least passed me by, and have gone largely unmentioned by the huge number of predictions, videos and posts and lists on bookish social media. If we look at the list in numbers, it sounds really awesome. We've got 8 debut authors, 3 Irish authors continuing that streak of Irish fiction dominating in book awards. We've got 1 previous winner, which we'll talk about in a second, and 7 indie publishers. And then over half the list, 9 of the books are from non-white or mixed race authors, which is fantastic in terms of diversity. Going by the numbers alone, this list seems brilliant and exciting, but the quality of a long list isn't in its metadata, it's in the books themselves. And my reaction to these books, to be totally honest, has been a bit like this meme.
No. Well...
Yeah, my initial reaction to this set of books has been a feeling of, let's say, like mild disappointment. I know what you're thinking, he's salty about his predictions, but I promise that I am not. I really don't mind my guesses being wrong. It would have been cool to get a few more than the one that I got correctly, but the one I got, I'm really happy about. And at the end of the day, my list wasn't a wish list. There were loads and loads of other predictions out there that I would have preferred to read over my own. I included quite a few titles that I had read and didn't feel massively excited about, but I thought they were a good fit for what the Women's Prize normally tries to do. So it's not that, and I have been doing a little bit of thinking about what made me feel disappointed, and that's kind of why this video has come a little bit late. And I think it stems from a feeling like this list may have been specifically designed to surprise, to shine a light on underappreciated books or new talent, rather than trying to pick the best. Don't get me wrong, I always love surprises on this list, where a book I might not otherwise have read gets brought to my attention. Like last year, The Bandit Queens was an absolute gem from the long list that I probably would never have read except for its long listing. And I'm really grateful to the Women's Prize for shining a light on that book. But you've got to get the balance right. And as this list was announced and each of the books was described, I just wasn't like massively pulled in by many of them. There weren't books here that made me want to immediately drop on my reading plans to pick them up. Now that obviously does not mean the books are bad, because I have not read them yet. All I'm reacting to is like the blurb and the cover and the judge's description of the book. But the last 12 months have been absolutely fantastic in terms of fiction written by women. And what the judges are saying with this long list is that all of the books here are better than everything else that was eligible and submitted. And we don't really know what was submitted or not. That seems like a tall order to me, but maybe it's true. And if so, we are in for some amazing reading. So yeah, this isn't a whinge about the list. It's just my honest response to it, because I think it's silly to get like angry or annoyed at the subjective opinion of a small group of readers, which is what every judging panel is. There's maybe one book that I'm really disappointed didn't make it, which is The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor, but I will keep my fingers crossed for a Booker nod later in the year, and I think it's possible that this is one that will be a good contender for the Goldsmiths Prize as well. Thankfully, it's all water under the bridge now, because the more that I've given it some thought and the more I've looked into the books, I'm definitely more on the side of being excited now. You could say that I've moved through all of the stages of grief and come to terms with it. Side note, did you know that although we always talk about the 5 stages of grief, or the Kubler-Ross model as it's called, being something that people coping with loss go through, it was originally written to describe the experience of the person who is dying. Not a cheery piece of trivia, but I always think that's quite interesting. Anyway, let's get onto the books now, and I'd love to know your reaction to the long list and whether you've read any of these, whether there's any that you're really excited about. Do let me know in the comments. I'm going to step through them one by one, starting with the ones that I've read and then moving towards like the more obscure ones. The first of the 2 that I've read is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. This is one that I absolutely loved. It was one of my favourite books that I read last year, and I think my favourite book that would have been eligible for the prize this year. So I'm absolutely thrilled that it's made it in. This is a book written from the perspective of a mother to her son. She is soldier, he is sailor, and it covers the early tumultuous days of motherhood. It's just so evocative and real and raw and enjoyable to read. I have heard this book described as reading it being the same feeling as having a panic attack, which I can see is kind of true, but it is so beautifully written and it has a lot of humour that I think it is well worth it, and I just really love this book. I also adore the paperback cover that they've recently released, and so I am tempted to thrust this book into the hands of a friend and treat myself to the new cover. The other one that I've already read is Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. This is a book that was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year. It is a very short, little, quiet novel about a family dealing with the loss of the mother from that family and channeling that grief into squash, and the father sort of coaches his daughters in playing squash, and one of them shows quite a bit of promise, and it's from her perspective that this book is told. I've seen some people say that this makes a lot more sense as a Women's Prize nominee than a Booker nominee, but I kind of feel the opposite. I think this is quiet and subtle in a way that seems to me a little bit more fitting for the Booker, and it reminds me a lot of Claire Keegan. So yeah, I did enjoy this one. I didn't really expect it to be on the list. I thought it might be a little bit too subtle, but yeah, pleased to see it on there. Interestingly, there are 3 authors here who have got previous experience with the Women's Prize, and 2 of the 3, including a former winner, were complete surprises when the list was announced. The first one I'll talk about though is the least surprising one, and that was The Wren by Anne Enright. Enright's previously been longlisted and shortlisted, and Alice over at Alice and the Giant Bookshelf made a very good point that she seems to release her books and be nominated in every Olympic year. So it was right in front of us. The pieces of the puzzle were there, we just needed to put them together. And quite a lot of people did. I'm listening to this one on audio at the moment, and it is a family drama about a mother and daughter and the looming shadow of the grandfather who was a famous Irish poet. So far, I'm finding it has terrific writing. It's full of the mix I've come to expect from Irish literature between humour and then deeply serious emotional issues and themes. And it's really interesting that while it's narrated really well, I love listening to sort of Irish narrators, I do kind of wish that I had a physical copy, because I feel like there would be a lot to appreciate in the language and writing on the page itself. This one's probably a very strong contender just by virtue of the fact that this is Enright's 5th nomination, I think. Next is Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. Ganeshananthan has previously been longlisted for the Women's Prize, so this one maybe shouldn't have been surprising, but it was. And it's been a very good week for this author, as Brotherless Night has also just been nominated for the Carol Shields Prize, which, if you're unfamiliar with, is a relatively new prize in the US that also aims to reward excellent fiction written by women. And it is very, very lucrative. I think the winner gets like $150,000 or something like that. This book is another family drama, and it's set in Sri Lanka against the backdrop of the Civil War, and we're following a young woman wanting to become a doctor. It sounds like a really interesting examination of how actions intended only to help and to do no harm, as doctors do, how that can fit into a world of violently conflicting ideologies. Sri Lankan fiction has had quite a lot of success in recent years, particularly in the Booker, where A Passage North was longlisted. I can't remember if it was shortlisted, but then The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida was also the winner of the Booker Prize a couple of years ago. So it'll be really interesting to see how this one does. The next book comes from a former Women's Prize winner, and it was one that I somehow completely missed because I listed out all of the former winners with eligible books, and I did not notice this at all. And it is The Restless Dolly Maunder by Kate Grenville, who won the prize in 2001 for her novel The Idea of Perfection. Grenville is an Australian author, and this is set in New South Wales. And to be honest, I can't really tell tons about it because the blurb is quite generic about a woman trying to push open the doors in society that have been closed to her. So to be totally candid, I just don't know what to make of it, and I'm maybe less interested in this one. That combination of like kind of generic sounding plot and kind of generic cover, it just doesn't really turn my gears too much. But I will eagerly await other readers' responses to it. Right, we're now into the books that I have heard of but just haven't read. And the first one of those I'll talk about is Enter Ghost by Isaballa Hammad. Hammad is a British Palestinian author, and this is about a character going back to Palestine to put on a production of Hamlet in the West Bank. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that the judges have gone for this, given how sensitive this topic is. I always think of the Women's Prize as being a bit safe, and what's going on at the moment is really deeply troubling. So I really admire them for putting this book into readers' hands. This is a book I already have on Kindle and plan to read this month anyway, because it's on my ballot for the BookTube prize, so it's really good timing for me particularly, and I will definitely be reading it. Then we have Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. This recently was nominated for the inaugural Nero Awards, but it lost out to The Bee Sting in the Best Fiction category. This follows a journalist as he investigates an Irish family implicated in a murder. I'm not 100% sure this is the case, but it seems to me like it has some real true crime vibes, and I do quite like that theme at the moment. I really enjoyed Penance last year by Eliza Clark, and I'm currently reading I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay, which I can't say anything about because I'm also reading it for the BookTube prize, and you have to keep everything under wraps until the end of March, but I haven't DNF'd it. That's all I'll say. When Ordinary Human Failings first came out, I really was not that interested in it because I did not enjoy Megan Nolan's first novel, Acts of Desperation, at all. It just really didn't work for me. I found it irritating, but I have been told by a number of people that this one is quite different from that, and she's done a really good job with it. So I'm interested and intrigued. I'll probably pick this one up. Then we've got 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Mirinae Lee. Shout out to the person in the comments on my predictions video who noticed this one was blurbed by Monica Ali and called it out as a contender. This one is set in a retirement home, and it's about a woman who has all of these fanciful stories about her life over obviously 100 years. Just because of that, it's reminding me a lot of the 100-year-old man who climbed out of the window and disappeared, except it's supposed to be quite brutal, where the 100-year-old man is quite funny. And I say funny, I didn't really enjoy that book. Anyway, the jury is out for me on this one. I'm not massively grabbed by the concept, but if other people say that it's really good, then maybe I will give it a go. Hangman by Binyam is one that I've got a copy of. I had heard of this, I considered reading it last year, but never in a million years did I expect to see it on the Women's Prize long list. It just seems too strange and experimental and weird to fit onto this list, but here we are. This one is about a man who returns to his home country in sub-Saharan Africa after living in the US for multiple decades, and when he arrives, everyone is very over-familiar with him, like they know him, but they are not familiar to him. He has no idea who these people are. I'm guessing it's going to deal with alienation and assimilation and being in between two cultures. I've heard it's quite absurd and quite funny. It's got a weird ending, and I'm definitely interested in reading this one. Next is River East, River West by Aubre Lescure. This one had stood out to me in bookshops lately, as I think it's got a really beautiful cover. I just find it so elegant and nice. It's a story set across 2 timelines, and like the Wren, it's about a mother and a daughter and their different ambitions in life. But this one is set in China, and I think partly in the US. It tackles race and identity, the implications of economic growth in China, but also the American dream. I've seen some mixed reactions to this one from people who have read it. Personally, it appeals to me and the kind of books that I like to read. So if I have time, I think I probably will give it a go. Next is Nightbloom by Peace Adzo Medie, and I have a copy of this because I spotted it in my local Remainders bookshop. So I got this lovely hardback copy for £4, which is an absolute bargain. This one is a story of female friendship between 2 cousins in Ghana who were very close as kids, became estranged, and then their paths crossed again later in life. That does seem like a plot that I have heard before or read before. So I'm interested to see what it will do that sets it apart and adds a little bit more interest and intrigue. But yeah, it's at least a very pretty cover. I really like this. Moving now into the books that are completely new to me, and there were 5 books from this long list that I had just never ever heard of. And I'll start with one that I'm definitely interested in, and so I picked up a copy, and that is The Blue Beautiful World by Karen Lord. Lord is a Barbadian author, and this perhaps is the most left field choice here because it is a sci-fi novel that deals with climate change and first contact with aliens. I know some people have called out that this could be this year's pod, but I personally love a bit of sci-fi, and this is one of the ones that I'm most excited for. I definitely want to read more climate fiction. I'm really interested in that topic. So I think I will get to this one relatively soon compared to the rest of the long list. Then we have And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliott. This is by an Indigenous Canadian author, and it's awesome to get that sort of representation on a list like this. I've certainly never picked up a novel from an author with that background before. This is about a woman who seemingly has everything going for her. She lives in a nice house. She's just given birth to a young baby. Not that you can give birth to an old baby, but yes. Anyway, what happens then is that she starts experiencing these unusual goings on, some strange voices that she can't explain and weird things going on in her home. Seems a little bit similar in theme to Soldier Sailor, so dealing with postnatal stress and depression, but perhaps with a paranormal or spiritual twist. I'm not sure if that is true, but that's the vibe I'm getting, at least from like the cover and the description. I think this one seems really interesting and it's very beautiful. This hardback cover is definitely better than the paperback cover, which is coming soon, which is the same sort of design, but it's like on a white background. I think this book in dark mode is definitely a lot nicer. The next 2 books are probably the most indie ones. They seem to be from these very small independent presses. The first one is In Defense of the Act by Effie Black. This seemed incorrectly described as an essay when the judges announced the long list, but it is fiction, and it's about a character who has these staunch views on suicide, and those views get challenged and changed over the course of the book, which, it's worth saying, seems to be the shortest book on the long list. It has absolutely fantastic reviews. Obviously, because of it being from a very small press and not having been read by many people, that sample size is very small, but it had like 4.5 on Goodreads and 4.9 on Amazon when I first looked. So I'm really interested in this one. I think it could be like the hidden gem that the judges have uncovered. The other book from a very small press is A Trace of Sun by Pam Williams. This is about a boy who is left behind in the Caribbean when his family moves to England in search of a better life, and then they're reuniting years later. It's another one that, to be honest, doesn't give away too much in the blurb. It's hard to like get your teeth into like what is it that's going to grip you about this book, because those sorts of stories about estrangement and coming back together are quite common, and it's hard for them to set themselves apart. However, this one does say that it is inspired in part by the author's own experiences, so I expect it will be a very authentic telling. I'm not drawn to this one massively, but I'm not sure how much of that is down to the painfully generic cover. The final book then is The Maiden by Kate Foster. This is a debut historical thriller based on a real-life case of a woman in the 17th century accused of murdering her lover. Honestly, at first glance, this is a book I have zero interest in. I'm not really a reader of this kind of thing, but people have been saying some really good things about it and calling out that the writing seems to have some more literary sensibilities than you'd expect usually for fiction in this genre. So I don't know, if it's a propulsive, quick read, maybe I will slot it in at some point, but it's not high up on my list. It's not a priority for me. So those are the 16 books, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of them. I guess one other slight disappointment I have is just a personal one about my own capacity as a reader to be able to dive into these. I would have loved to have been able to read the whole long list, and I kind of was hoping or counting on more of the books being ones that I'd already read. But with the sheer number of surprises, as exciting as that is, I've only read 2. And so with all my other reading commitments, I think there is close to no chance that I will get through everything. And I have found that because some of these books are quite obscure, they seem quite hard to get a hold of. Like, I went through the list and put them all into my library's catalogue, which covers the whole southwest region in the UK. And I think there were like 7 books that weren't even listed. So maybe the library will get copies of them and they'll become available at some point in the future. But for now, it's just a little bit tricky to get my hands on them. Let me know what you think of the long list. Are you gonna get stuck into some of the reading? And if so, which books are you gonna prioritize? If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button. It helps my channel out a lot. And if you are interested in more content from me, then hit the subscribe button and you'll get a new video from me in your subscriptions feed about once a week. But until next time, toodles.